The car door shut with a soft, final sound, and the silence that followed felt heavier than the suitcase sitting by my feet. The sky was overcast, that dull gray that makes time feel suspended, and I remember staring at my reflection in the window, wondering how a birthday morning could end like this. I was still holding my purse, still wearing the sweater I chose carefully, still believing this was a misunderstanding that would fix itself if I stayed calm. If you've ever trusted someone completely and felt the ground disappear under you, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Stories like this are more common than people admit. The building in front of me smelled like disinfectant and old carpet, and that was when the truth finally settled in. I wasn't being celebrated. I was being placed. I didn't know it yet, but that moment was the first crack in a life I thought was secure, and everything I believed about love, family, and safety started to unravel right there. I thought I was being taken out for my birthday, but instead I was left behind with a suitcase I did not pack and a door that closed without looking back. I was 62 years old, a mother of one, living quietly in a small Ohio town, and I still believed love meant you did not abandon people on their special days. That morning, I woke up careful and hopeful, choosing a sweater I saved for nice moments, brushing my hair as if it mattered, telling myself that being patient had always paid off. By the afternoon, the truth settled in, slowly and painfully. This was not confusion or a mistake. This was a decision that had been planned, signed, and carried out while I smiled and trusted. I remember sitting there, feeling smaller than I had in decades, realizing that the life I thought I was walking into was not a celebration but an ending. I did not cry right away. I felt something quieter and heavier, the kind of shock that makes time stretch and sound disappear. In that silence, I understood this day was not a birthday, but the start of something I could not see. I was never the kind of mother who needed applause. I believed love was shown in the quiet, repetitive ways that never make stories worth telling. I raised my son with steady hands and an open heart, packing lunches, showing up early, staying late, and convincing myself that sacrifice was just another word for devotion. After my husband passed, I learned how to be strong without asking for help. I kept the house running, paid the bills, and learned how to sit with silence without letting it harden me. I told myself independence was a gift I could give my child, proof that he never had to worry about me. But over time, something shifted. Calls became shorter. Visits felt rushed. I noticed a careful tone when he spoke, like he was managing me instead of talking to me. I began questioning small things, my memory, my reactions, my emotions. When he seemed irritated, I assumed it was because I was asking too much. I told myself this was just what aging looked like. I tried to be easier, quieter, less present. I stopped sharing worries and swallowed loneliness so it would not inconvenience anyone. When doubt crept in, I pushed it away, believing that love meant understanding without being understood. Looking back, I see how deeply I trusted without protecting myself. I gave freely, emotionally, and financially, never asking where the line should be. By the time my birthday approached, I had already learned how to shrink, how to wait, and how to hope quietly for reassurance that never came. That silence felt familiar, comforting even, and I did not yet realize it was training me to accept something I should have questioned, resisted, and refused long before anyone decided I was suddenly too much for them to carry. I woke up that morning with the kind of quiet hope that feels fragile even as you hold it. It was my birthday, and I moved through the house slowly, making coffee, straightening pillows, pretending the day might still surprise me. I told myself not to expect too much, but I set 2 plates anyway, a habit of optimism I had never learned to break. When my son arrived, relief washed over me so quickly it almost hurt. I gathered my purse, smoothed my sweater, and let myself believe the story I wanted to hear. As we drove, the town passed by in familiar blurs, but something felt off. We did not turn toward the places that held memory or warmth. We kept going, farther than comfort. The building came into view before understanding did. A quiet place with trimmed hedges and glass doors that reflected me back, looking smaller than I felt inside. In that moment, excitement drained from my body, replaced by a hollow weight. I realized this trip was not about lunch or celebration. It was about placement, about decisions made without my voice. Inside, the air felt different, heavier, as if time slowed to watch me absorb what was happening. Papers appeared. Smiles felt rehearsed. I nodded because my mind could not yet catch up to my heart. I understood then that my birthday was no longer mine. My choices were no longer mine. I walked forward because stopping felt impossible, carrying the quiet grief of knowing that something essential had been taken from me. This was not a misunderstanding, it was a handoff, and I was being delivered into a life I had not agreed to enter. The doors closed behind me, and the sound marked the end of the life I recognized that day. I was guided through hallways that smelled like cleaner and overcooked food, places meant to feel safe but stripped of warmth. Everything moved quickly, not with urgency, but with certainty, as if my presence was just another task already scheduled. I realized no one was asking me anything because everything had already been decided. Documents replaced voices. Forms slid across desks. Pages filled with words that spoke about my life as if I were not sitting there. My name appeared again and again, attached to decisions I did not make. Care was the word they used, but it felt more like control wrapped in polite language. By the time I reached my room, the truth settled in. This was not temporary confusion. This was authority. I had been reduced to a file, a signature, a bed number. The woman who raised a child, buried a husband, and held a home together was no longer visible here. That first night was long. The bed felt too firm, the air too quiet, broken only by distant footsteps and muted televisions. I lay awake staring at a ceiling I did not recognize, replaying every moment that brought me here. I tried to defend him in my mind, telling myself love must have guided his choices. But somewhere between midnight and morning, something shifted. I stopped explaining his actions. I stopped searching for excuses. The anger arrived quietly, not as rage, but as clarity. Love had been replaced by paperwork, and I understood then that if I wanted to survive this place, I would have to stop trusting love to save me and start trusting myself instead. That realization hardened into resolve, the quiet beginning of endurance, observation, and a refusal to disappear no matter how small they tried to make me inside me. I learned quickly how invisible a person can become when decisions are no longer theirs. Days blended together, marked by meal trays, medication cups, and voices that spoke slowly, as if volume and patience could replace respect. People smiled at me without seeing me, using tones meant for children or for endings, not for women who had lived full lives. I watched the routine carefully. Doors opening, doors closing, televisions humming in common rooms where no one chose the channel. Other residents sat nearby, each carrying their own quiet grief. Some waited for visitors who never came. Some had already stopped waiting. I listened because listening was still mine. What hurt most was not the structure, but the assumption. The way my thoughts were dismissed before they were spoken. The way forgetting was expected. encouraged even, until doubt crept in and tried to convince me I belonged there. I felt anger rise, then settle into something sharper. At night, I reminded myself of facts. My name, my memories. The years I had navigated loss and responsibility without anyone holding my hand. I held on to clarity like a lifeline, repeating it silently until sleep came. They could limit my movement, but they could not take my awareness. I began paying attention, noticing patterns, kindnesses, weaknesses in the system. I was alone, yes, but I was not broken. Somewhere beneath the quiet, something steady was forming, a readiness I could feel growing, waiting for the right moment to surface at last now. I met her on a morning that felt no different from the others, gray and quiet, the kind that blended into itself. She was filling in, someone new, and I could tell immediately she moved differently. She looked at me longer, not past me, not through me, but at me, as if expecting an answer rather than compliance. As she went through the motions of her work, I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Recognition. She did not rush or simplify her presence. Instead, she paid attention. And in that attention, I felt myself reappear, piece by piece. It startled me how quickly warmth followed after weeks of emotional cold. For the first time since arriving, I sensed doubt in the walls around me, a small hesitation, like a hairline fracture in something solid. She noticed details others ignored, the way I followed conversations, the questions I asked in my head even when I stayed quiet. I realized she was measuring me not by age or placement, but by awareness. Later that day, she left something behind on my bedside table, something small and ordinary, but deliberate. It felt like a test and an invitation at once. I did not touch it right away. I only looked at it, letting possibility take shape slowly. That night, as the building settled into its familiar hush, I understood that survival was no longer my only task. Someone had seen me clearly, and that single moment had shifted the balance. Everything changed. I waited until the building went quiet, until footsteps faded and the televisions hummed low in distant rooms. The computer in the corner of the common area was old and slow, but it worked. I did not expect anything when I sat down, only distraction, something to steady my mind for a few minutes. What I found made my hands shake, a small slip of paper, numbers entered almost by habit, and suddenly the screen showed something impossible. Not relief, not joy, fear, pure and sharp. I checked again because disbelief felt safer than hope. It was real, and it was dangerous. My first thought was not escape, but exposure. If anyone knew, I would disappear in a way that had nothing to do with walls or doors. I felt the weight of every camera, every chart, every signature that had already been used against me. This secret did not feel like a gift. It felt like a loaded object placed carefully in my hands. I printed nothing. I told no one. I folded the evidence into the smallest space I could find and carried it like a second heartbeat. From that moment on, every smile felt suspicious, every kindness conditional. But beneath the fear, something else formed. Clarity. I stopped reacting and started calculating. Silence became strategy. Patience became preparation. I understood then that survival was no longer enough. I needed precision, timing, and help chosen carefully. That night, lying awake, I did not imagine freedom. I imagined steps. I left the same way I had learned to survive, quietly and without drawing attention. Days earlier, I had memorized routines, noted pauses, and learned which moments passed unobserved. On the morning I chose, I moved slowly, carrying nothing that looked like intention. My heart stayed steady because panic would have betrayed me faster than noise. Every step outside felt unreal. The air was colder than I expected, sharp and honest. I did not look back. I kept my face neutral, my pace ordinary, as if I belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. Fear walked beside me, but it no longer led. The bus ride blurred into miles I refused to count. I chose a place where no one knew my name, a small room with clean sheets and no questions. When the door closed behind me, I stood still for a long time, listening. Silence felt different there. It felt earned. Relief did not arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, settling between breaths, loosening my shoulders inch by inch. I slept lightly, ready to move again if I had to. Freedom, I learned, is careful at first. Even then, I knew disappearance was not the same as safety. Somewhere, decisions made about me still existed. Papers still carried my name. But for that moment, alone and unseen, I was no longer contained. I was moving forward, awake, and not lost. I understood this calm was temporary, but it was enough to remind me who I was again. I spent my first quiet days alone going through what I still had: a purse, a folder, old mail I had never questioned. In the stillness, patterns began to surface that I could no longer ignore. Bank statements showed withdrawals I did not remember approving. Dates lined up with moments when I had felt suddenly dependent, suddenly unsure of myself. Insurance forms listed changes I had never discussed. Power of attorney language appeared where trust had once lived. Each page felt colder than the last. I moved slowly, checking numbers twice, resisting the urge to soften the truth. This was not confusion or oversight. It was planning. The gaps in my memory were not age or weakness. They were created, reinforced by reassurance and pressure, until doubt felt like my own idea. What hurt most was recognizing how long it had been happening. Small suggestions, gentle corrections, a steady rewriting of my reality until resistance felt unreasonable. Love had been used as leverage, concern as camouflage. By the time I set the papers down, grief had given way to clarity. The person I thought was protecting me had been managing me. My disappearance had not been an accident. It had been necessary for someone else's control to work. In that moment, I understood the danger had not ended when I left. It had only shifted, and I knew I had to be ready, because once control is threatened, it always tries to return. Silence became my shield, and preparation priority. I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the envelope. It was thin, official, and addressed with a confidence that assumed I would comply. Inside were motions and filings meant to return me to silence, to declare that my absence had been a problem needing correction. Fear came fast, sharp as it had been before, but it did not take over. I read every line slowly. This was not worry for my safety. It was irritation at my independence. The language was careful, almost polite, but the intention was blunt. I was being repositioned, not protected. For a moment, I imagined hiding again, choosing smaller spaces, letting time blur me into something harmless. That instinct passed. I had already learned what retreat cost. I had already paid for quiet with my freedom once. What surprised me most was how calm I became. My hands steadied, my thoughts lined up. I began gathering documents instead of excuses, dates, records, names. The story was no longer just mine to remember. It was mine to prove. This attempt to erase me did not feel like the end. It felt like confirmation. If my voice mattered so little, it would not need silencing. If my presence was harmless, it would not need legal force. I understood then that hiding would only invite pursuit. Standing would invite resistance. but it would also invite truth. And for the first time, I was ready to meet him where he thought I would fall at last now. I walked into the courtroom exactly as I had planned, steady and unhurried, carrying only a folder and the quiet certainty that I belonged there. The room felt heavy with expectation, but I did not shrink under it. I had already survived worse silence than this. I felt eyes on me, weighing my age, my calm, my refusal to look afraid. I reminded myself that composure was not performance. It was truth. I listened carefully, noting how concern was framed as control, how care was used as justification. None of it surprised me anymore. When it was my turn to be seen, I did not defend myself emotionally. I let preparation speak. Dates aligned, documents matched. Patterns became visible without my raising my voice. I watched the story shift as facts replaced assumptions, and credibility moved quietly to my side. There was a moment when I sensed the balance change. The room no longer felt like a test. It felt like a correction. Competence was acknowledged. Autonomy was named. I felt something loosen in my chest that I had been holding for years. I did not look at my son then. I focused inward, honoring the part of me that had stayed clear when confusion was encouraged. Standing there, I understood that survival had taught me discipline, and discipline had carried me here. When it ended, I gathered my things without urgency. I walked out as myself, not managed, not diminished. The place meant for my collapse became the place where my footing proved solid. Outside, in the quiet after judgment. I paused, knowing my freedom was no longer borrowed. It was mine to decide how to use next. I carried no triumph, only steady resolve, gratitude for clarity, and the calm strength earned by telling the truth that day. I did not celebrate my freedom loudly. I sat with it first, letting it settle, understanding that getting my life back also meant deciding what kind of life I wanted. Anger was easy to reach for, but it felt like another form of captivity. Instead, I chose small, deliberate acts. I reopened a bank account in my own name. I updated my records. I walked through a park I used to take my child to, reminding myself that memory and pain can exist without control. Each step was quiet, but it was mine. I reached out to people I trusted, not to relive what happened, but to reconnect as myself. I volunteered a few hours a week, listening more than speaking, learning that service can steady a shaken spirit. Purpose did not arrive as a grand plan. It arrived as routine, responsibility, and care. Freedom. I learned is not proven by distance from harm, but by closeness to values. I did not need revenge to feel whole. I needed alignment. Some evenings I still sit with the weight of everything I lost, but it no longer defines me. I am building something slower and truer now, toward a quieter ending. I sometimes think about the woman I was on that birthday, waiting to be chosen, believing love would always recognize me. When I look back now, I see how far I have traveled, not just in distance, but in understanding. I lost time, trust, and a version of family I thought was permanent. That loss still aches on quiet days, but it also taught me something I had never fully learned before. My worth does not depend on being agreeable, silent, or convenient. It depends on knowing myself and protecting that knowledge. Betrayal changed the direction of my life, but it did not end it. What was meant to reduce me became the moment I stood upright. I learned that clarity can grow inside confusion, and strength can exist long before anyone else acknowledges it. Today, I live more gently with myself. I ask better questions. I listen to discomfort instead of explaining it away. I no longer confuse sacrifice with love or control with care. I choose presence, honesty, and boundaries, even when they are uncomfortable. Sharing stories creates bridges between strangers, reminding us that pain isolates, but honesty connects. I believe healing multiplies when we speak without shame and when we listen without judgment. That belief now guides how I move through the world. It feels quiet, steady, and true after everything I endured here. If you have stayed with me through this story, thank you for bearing witness. Being heard matters more than people realize. If any part of my journey feels familiar to you, you are not alone, and you are not imagining what you feel. If you are willing, share your own experience in the comments. I read everyone. Sometimes telling the truth out loud is the first step toward coming home to yourself.